Hello and welcome to Fresh Perspectives. My name is Gail, and my guest today is a lady named Valerie Walawender. Thank you for coming on, Valerie. Now, tell our viewing audience something about yourself.
Oh, well, I'm an artist. I am very happily married. I have 2 adult sons who are happily in their career. And I work full-time as a senior recreational therapist for the Office for Persons with Developmental Disabilities. And I am the creator and founder of a program called the CREATE Project.
Okay, what is the CREATE Project?
The CREATE in the CREATE Project is actually an acronym, and it stands for Child Responsive Empowering Art Through Everyone.
Oh, okay. Why do you think it's possible to create a community that is free of child abuse and neglect using the arts?
Well, the CREATE Project is this kind of intervention, and that is very, very gentle. In my own experience, I have, as an artist, I have felt the healing results of the arts in terms of dealing with some things in my own life, in terms of expressing my feelings and communicating with others. So it's been very powerful. And then I also discovered that in neurological studies and psychological studies, sociological, anthropological, there's a lot of evidence that the arts can be used for healing individuals and families and the community.
Okay. So what is the aim of the CREATE Project?
The CREATE Project is an arts-based community intervention that's designed to help our community embrace the goal to become free of child abuse and neglect. And we use all different kinds of artists, graphic artists, musicians, writers, tradition bearers, who are people who may be doing folk arts, folk music, storytelling, or the tradition bearers also might be people who would be handing down a tradition, like doing a holiday or doing a certain kind of recipe in your family.
Oh, okay.
And we hook up the artists with child field workers and the community, people who are businesses, churches, organizations, and together they work to target and focus on the mission of the CREATE Project.
Oh, okay. What is the aim of the CREATE Project?
Well, I guess the largest goal of the CREATE Project is to create a world where perhaps we are the first community in the world that's free of child abuse and neglect, where children can grow to their highest potential. And using all these different types of people in the community to kind of come together and focus on this goal.
Okay. How does the CREATE Project do this?
It's a very gentle and very proactive process, and by bringing these different people together, we make opportunities for them to share their art and to share their traditions. So there's actually, which I can get into a little bit more later, but there's 3 different ways that we do that through the process of creating collaborations in the community between community partners and the artists to create new works of art. And another process would be called Share, where individuals would share their traditions with child field workers. Child field workers would share with the tradition bearers, and then the tradition bearers could be empowered in the community.
Oh, okay. Why do you think it works?
Oh, well, child abuse and neglect are very family-based cultural problems. They are very embedded in the family, embedded in our culture and in our society. And the CREATE Project actually is a very family-based cultural solution. it is very different from existing institutions. It supports them and draws from them, but because things like child protection, other kinds of interventions, they usually kind of happen after the fact, and this is kind of working with the community and their strengths and what they have already going for them.
Oh, okay. When did you first become interested in the issues of child abuse and neglect?
Actually, my entire life I have witnessed, very sadly, instances of child abuse and neglect. I didn't know that's what I was witnessing. I didn't know the name for it. I think that that was not even in common usage, the word child abuse, until relatively recently. But there was a turning point in my life when I was living in an apartment in a town, and my landlord and landlady lived in the apartment next to me. Mm-hmm. And they were very upstanding citizens. Mm-hmm. They went to church, they were professionals, they were educated, they had a spotless home. But every day I would hear them berating and yelling at and screaming at their children, who were ages 3 and 4. Mm-hmm. I would hear the children cry, and I saw them kind of jerk their kids around. They kind of treated them like sacks of potatoes. Oh. And very sadly, the mom one day was bragging to me about how she toilet trained her kids. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, I would take them out onto the lawn, and if they wet their pants, I would strip them down naked and turn the cold hose on them. And I know, it's shocking.
Yes.
And this is actually, in the larger scheme of things, a very small part of this very bad problem. But I was so disturbed by this, and there was one particular night that I heard these children crying through the wall, that it was unbearable. Mm-hmm. And so I went to the library the next day, and mm-hmm. I got out a big stack of books. And one of the books was a book called The Little Victims by Pulitzer Prize author Howard James. And it was so moving, and I had never read a book about children's issues, or even really kids, very much before. Mm-hmm. And it was 600 pages, and I read it through the whole day and the whole night and finished it. And in his book, he talked about a program that was out of Lafayette, Indiana, and it was called the Lafayette Plan. And he said it was very effective at addressing children's issues. So I hunted down this woman who initiated this program, mm-hmm. and asked her to be my mentor. Mm-hmm. And I instituted that particular program in 2 different communities.
Okay, well, good for you.
Thank you.
When did you first start to take action?
Well, as I said, when I had this very difficult experience witnessing what these young children were going through, I read the book, started instituting the Lafayette Plan, which involved developing a community conference where there were people from the community who would talk to each other. So you pre-registered people and you set them up in these joint tables. So there were, because usually in a community, medical people talk to medical people, government people talk to government people, business people talk to business people, but they don't really talk to each other, and parents the same way. So it was kind of an opportunity for them to talk together and come to some brainstorming about what they felt the issues were that kids were facing, and then to identify solutions that could be taken in a year's time. And then task forces were formed to address these different issues. So in both communities there were some very great successes, but I felt it didn't really go far enough. Mm-hmm.
When these initiatives did not achieve what you wanted, what did you do then?
Well, I really thought that I needed to study more and really learn about the issues more. I ended up going back to college to mm-hmm. get a master's degree. Mm-hmm. And I also started creating art that was specifically about this issue and things that I was learning. I created works of art and whole programs to address these different issues, very specific kinds of issues that I was learning about.
Okay. What did you study?
The focus of my graduate studies was on the development of art-based tools to help people who had experienced trauma. And that is a very, that's kind of like a very broad term that really child abuse and child neglect come under, because trauma is an injury to a person's, the integrity of the person, in their physical, their mental, their emotional being, and even their spiritual being. So I started studying about different tools, and particularly how to integrate the arts. And there were actually, I found out that there were a lot of interventions that all of the arts can be used to help people who experience trauma, and also to bring communities together to address this issue.
Okay. Can you talk a bit about factors that contribute to child abuse and neglect?
It's a very difficult and complex issue because it's psychological, it's social, it's historical. There's it goes into many, many kinds of realms. It's cultural. So in one of the problems is that child abuse is very taboo. It's even difficult for me, and I've been studying this for years, it's even difficult for me to talk about. And it's difficult for everybody to talk about. So one of the things that we need to do is kind of get away from the taboo so we can kind of open a conversation. There's a lack of consensus in the community about what really constitutes child abuse. Everybody has different ideas. There's church ideas, there's government ideas, there's law enforcement, there's family, there's all different kinds of ideas. So I think that one of the things we need to do is come to some kind of consensus. What really is this? What is this about? What do we agree on? There's also the problem that there's a patchwork of services that address child abuse in the community. So there's one group over here that's working on it, another group, but the whole community has not come together to say, this is a thing that is affecting all of us, and we really need to address it. Also, there's many stresses that are on the individual, on the family, even on the culture. And the stresses range from the stresses could be poverty, they could be alcoholism, they could be just not enough money, unemployment. These stresses really contribute, and also just lack of understanding about what are effective ways to raise our children in the way that we all want to.
Okay.
And another issue is, I will just say, is the transgenerational transmission of trauma.
Oh yes. So tell us what child abuse is.
As I was saying before, it's an injury. It's an injury to a child's being on a physical level, on an emotional level, on a psychological and an intellectual level, or child abuse, child neglect are kind of two faces of the same kind of issue. Mm-hmm. One may be just very upon the child, and the other one is kind of just ignoring maybe, or not even understanding the emotional, physical, mm-hmm. intellectual needs of a child.
Or just letting the child fend for themselves when they're having a problem that they really would like an adult to help them with.
Right. That is very much an issue.
Okay, so how prevalent are these problems that we're talking about?
They're very, very prevalent. I don't have the statistics in my mind for the whole of the United States, but I will say that in Chautauqua County, we have the 8th highest rate of child abuse in the whole state of New York for all the counties.
The 8th highest?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's very, very prevalent, and it does affect all of us. A lot of people think that this is something that has nothing to do with me. I don't abuse my children. But it really is something that affects all of us. There's an impact that each one of us feels in our lives, and I think that that's part of the consciousness raising that we need to do.
Okay. How are we all affected by it?
There are individual impacts, there are social impacts, family impacts, and whole community and society at large kinds of impacts on a very small to a very large scale. The impacts are anything from an individual going through life experiencing a lot of anxiety, family going through substance abuse, family violence, unemployment. There's all kinds of, there's a cost, there's an enormous cost to having a family go through this process if they have been accused of child abuse too, because there's judicial costs, medical costs, psychological, counseling, all kinds of things, and that taps our whole system in a way, and the person may grow up and not be quite whole, so they may not be contributing to their maximum ability.
And it may make it difficult for them to get along with other people too.
Right, yeah, they could be damaged at a very, very, very young age, and it could be something that does not necessarily stem from something that the parent is doing or the caretaker is doing that they're even aware of, because parents sometimes they get sick or they're not available or the child is sick, and you can actually have lifelong effects even from the first hours of life that can affect you for the entirety of your life.
Okay, what is the transgenerational transmission of trauma?
Well, actually I have a quote that I brought about that, but it's kind of the idea that, I think I'm going to read that to you because it is a very nice quote about that issue. In the Encyclopedia of Trauma, an interdisciplinary guide, the editor, Charles Figley, wrote this: "The transgenerational process is viewed through a social work family systems perspective that suggests that what happens in one generation will affect the next. Transgenerational transmission of trauma suggests contagion, repeated and observable patterns within the family. These patterns of trauma-induced behaviors theoretically explain roles and values adopted by family members, as well as sources of vulnerability and resilience." And what this means is that what happened to a parent when they were a child and affected them will affect how they parent their children, and how those children, when they grow up, will affect the next generation. So just to give you an example, I was a child I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And so I lived through the women's movement, and there was segregation that was starting to be changed. There were a lot of stresses in society. My dad experienced some unemployment. So there were a lot of stresses that were happening there that carried on into my own children when I was being a parent. But my parents, they lived through, in their earliest years, the Great Depression and then World War II. And the changing role of women and all kinds of stresses that they went through as they were growing up. So what happened to them affected me, affected my children. Their parents were born kind of in the Victorian era, and where there were immigrants. My parents are both first-generation Americans.
Oh.
So, and the immigration, the trauma of immigration is huge, because you can just imagine people who are leaving their homeland to escape oppression or famine or all kinds of different conditions. They come and start new. And they're starting with nothing. And what the stresses that they went through with these huge families and all the things that they had to deal with, changing their whole culture and language. So there's not a lot of energy left to tend to the individual needs of children, perhaps. So that's the idea, that what happens in one generation affects all the subsequent generations. So my kids and I are experiencing things that have been carried on and passed down from our great grandparents.
Okay. So how does trauma relate to the issue of child abuse and neglect?
Well, like I said, trauma is this injury. And it is something that affects a child and a person on a very deep level. When a person experiences trauma, there's a few little technical terms. They may experience hypoarousal or hyperarousal. They may overreact or underreact to a situation. That's like one of the effects. They perhaps shut down, and emotionally, there's parts of their brain that are not working in conjunction with everything else. So maybe their judgment isn't what it needs to be in all situations. So there's many kinds of effects of this trauma and the trauma does not necessarily have to be specifically child abuse or neglect. It could also be, like 9/11, for instance. That was a trauma that we all experienced.
Yes.
So it could be a family illness, it could be death. There's all kinds of things that impact families and children, and as a gentler society, we just need to really heighten our awareness of this issue.
Okay, so how does this all relate to the CREATE project?
Well, I'm so happy now to talk about the CREATE project. The CREATE project is a very carefully designed kind of answer to all these issues. And it is, as I said, an arts-based community intervention. So there's 3 parts to the CREATE project, as I mentioned before: collaborate, share, and reach. And collaborate is where we are trying to bring a lot of public attention to the issue. We know that it's already a taboo issue, and we don't want people to be all upset, but we need to begin to have the conversation for artists maybe to create works of art, and all kinds of artists, literary artists, singers, dancers, and they would create works of art that would bring attention to the issue in some way, and they could be very positive things. This is actually a little piece of art that I did.
Okay. You can tell us about
it. Okay. Well, this is working on this concept that was introduced by Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson was kind of the foremost psychologist of the 20th century, and he did the most extensive study of families and people over the lifespan that had ever been done. So he kind of had said that whatever you're going through in your life at different ages, you're going to be facing these, what he called psychodynamic crises. And so I had this these are little nesting dolls, and they actually kind of represent parts of my life. This is this littlest one. And so, and this is the one I like talking about a lot, because he says, well, between birth and age 1, children learn trust or mistrust.
Oh.
So if a child is in a nurturing home and they're getting the touch that they need, the cuddling, the one-on-one interaction with their parents, the right kind of voice, and love, they will develop trust. But if the environment is not so great, it's more stressed, they may develop mistrust. And this is very critical because they're pre-verbal. So whatever happens to them is actually affecting the actual structure of their brain. Every memory that they have is actually forming the network that is going to be kind of guiding their emotional system for the rest of their life. So it's important to understand child development. So this is just, like I said, a little work of art that I did, but other artists could perhaps create a program or write a song, do, I don't know, a mural, all kinds of things. You see, are you looking at some of the other ones here?
Yeah, I'm looking at the backs. You have pictures on the back that represent things that people are going through, apparently, that are...
And actually that I have gone through, because this is all, this particular one is autobiographical, but it's for anyone. So, yeah, this was a fun project to do. So, for instance, right, in generativity, you are wanting to pass something on to the next generation, but and hopefully successfully doing that. So here I am passing on traditions of my Polish heritage and with my family. This is my family. Or you're stuck. You're in stagnation, and you don't. You feel stuck, you're not really achieving anything, you're not doing something that you're passing on. So this is one of the things that Erickson found, that this was worldwide, that people were having this kind of psychodynamic crisis in their life, and they needed to successfully go through this in order to kind of get to the next phase, integrity versus despair. And each of these things kind of leads to the next. And this may also contribute to why we've got this term arrested development.
Oh yeah, there was a TV program at one time by that name, and the family was pretty strange.
So supposing a person is, like between 2 and 3, right? And this is an age where kids have tantrums, and so perhaps the kid is shamed. Well, they may stay in that shame kind of thing, and they may have tantrums the rest of their life because they don't really have, they don't learn autonomy in the same kind of nurturing kind of way that we accept you, you're 2. This is what 2-year-olds do. So that person may go through chronological age, but they may be stuck emotionally or revert back to that emotional stage at these different phases. So it's great having this like little bit of education. So that's a little bit about what this collaborate part of the project is. So the collaborate also is the Create project acts as a matchmaker between the artist and a community partner. So the community partner could be a business, it could be a church, it could be just a group, and together they come together and they collaborate and create a new work of art to deal with some issue that is going to kind of enlighten the community and bring attention. And it can be very positive, it could be negative.
Okay. Could you tell us about how you integrate the arts works towards achieving the Create project mission?
Yeah, well, actually, this is the collaborate part of the project. The next part of the project is really the heart of the project, and that's called Share. And with Share, we have, that is where the collaborate part is very big, it's public, it's attention getting. Share is very intimate. It's one-on-one in small groups, and there's a very individual kind of healing that's happening. So with Share, we kind of identify tradition bearers in the community. And there's real reasons for that and who these tradition bearers are. So the tradition bearers are people who are passing on the traditions of their own people, but it could be a cultural group. And I think we've got some photographs of some of the cultural groups that I've worked with.
Should we show them now then?
We could,
pictures?
just to give you some examples.
Okay.
So here's a musician and sharing his musical traditions with a community child.
Okay.
And then it's very healing just to create music and to create it together too. This particular musician, Landon Gray, spectacular guy, and he is working with parents and kids, and kind of the idea with Share is that we will pass on these positive parenting processes through these tradition bearers. The tradition bearers are very integral to the project because they are already in the community, and they oftentimes intuitively know what very positive child rearing practices would entail, because they're invested in wanting to pass on their traditions.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I'm excited about using tradition bearers in the community, and I think there's some other photographs too.
Okay.
So here's there's a Native American whole huge family group and neighbors, and they come together socially. So one of the very positive things about the tradition bearers is that they are already embedded in the community, in the family, in the culture. And people in their community and their families often respect them. So they don't have the same problems and the issues that somebody like CPS or even a church or some outside agency would have, because they don't have to cross the threshold of the family home. They're already part of the home. They're already part of the community.
Okay.
So if they are, and they may not understand the power that they have and the strength that they have and the role that they can play in transmitting these positive child rearing practices. A lot of times they already know, they're already doing it. They just don't know the theory behind it. They don't know the idea behind it, but they're already doing it. And not always. Of course, there's always people who are going to not do so well. But now, if one of the ideas of the Create Project Share part is that we will empower the tradition bearers to understand why what they're doing is good. And we pair them up, and we have them go through an orientation and a kind of a training with child field workers, people who have an expertise in child development or trauma or education, whatever, and together they each share with each other. So the tradition bearers share what they do, the child field workers share what they do, and they kind of say, you know, we're doing kind of the same thing, but in kind of different ways. And then we provide opportunities for the tradition bearers to share what they do in the community, integrating these positive child rearing practices.
Okay.
Is that all understandable?
I think so. Now, is that lady sleeping?
It looks like it. This is a fantastic. We actually just had I'll try to see if I can find it here. This wonderful program in the fall called the Tradition Fest, and I'll show you. So and she was one of the tradition bearers at the Tradition Fest, and we had about 50 different tradition bearers in the community come together and share their traditions and share the positive child rearing practices that they did and that they do on a regular basis. So if you want, I don't know if you wanted to go back to the photograph of Maria, this Maria de Jesus. So she is a local tradition bearer, and she shares many kinds of traditions, and here she is sharing in the midst of this, but she shares this in her community anyway, a folk dance. And in the folk dance, she's kind of dreaming and she's sleeping, and then all of a sudden she kind of wakes up, and then she goes and she dances with her cup of coffee. It's really cute. and there's this young woman, and there were all these young people dancing with her as part of this beautiful folk dance. It's very traditional, goes back centuries. And so it's very beautiful because it brings the whole community together in something that's joyous and gorgeous. And that's kind of what positive child rearing is about.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Here is another beautiful family at another one of our events called Vigilia. We had a couple of years ago. This is a poster from that, and that is a traditional Christmas Eve feast that Polish people and Polish American people celebrate all over the world, and this has been going on for centuries, since probably the 9th century in Poland. And there's traditional foods, there are very specific kinds of little rituals that are very beautiful. I don't know if you can see it, there's some hay in the middle of the table. It stands for kind of the hay of the manger, because this is a Christmas Eve feast. And or actually, Vigilia means vigil supper, so it's the waiting of the Christ child. But there's a host called the opłatek. It's a little piece of flat bread, and they share it. And when they share this opłatek, it's so beautiful because from family member to family member, they share this, and the other family member breaks it off, and they say some little greeting. But the symbolism behind it is exquisite. And the symbolism is that when you break this bread, all the wrongs and offenses of the previous year have been forgiven. So that's a beautiful thing to share with your family. And and this is done, and it was done in my family. This is actually a little work of art that I did that shows all my family members around the table. This is a kind of a combination of a lot of the things that I've done. I don't know if you can see this, but here's the Vigilia table, and it's got the same kinds of things that were on the table that the other family was sharing. This is supposedly me. Well, there's me and my sister, my mother, my father, my husband, my children. So there's all this symbolism. But one of the beautiful traditions of the Vigilia is that it's good luck to have a stranger come to your home. So I did this special Vigilia painting to show many cultures that would come together. And we did this when I was growing up. We had people from, one year we had somebody from China and from Africa and Germany and Poland and Sweden all come to our family home to share the Vigilia with us. It's very beautiful. So these are just traditions that can be shared, and from culture to culture. But it's not just cultural traditions. Sometimes there's camping traditions. There's a woman in Fredonia who has been passing on these backpacking traditions for the last 25 years. And Girl Scouts, I know a family that has 4 generations of Girl Scouts. So it's something very beautiful about that brings families together.
Okay. Okay, were there more pictures?
Yeah, there's a few more, I think. Oh, so here's a Mexican family. Now, I had always seen, and this is a Mexican family down in Dunkirk, and I had seen these funny-looking skeletons for the Day of the Dead, and I thought, well, I didn't really understand it. But then when I started looking into this, I met some Mexican families and started talking with them. I started understanding that this is one of the most beautiful, exquisite traditions I had ever come across. And it's like a 4-day celebration of the deceased members of the family, so that they kind of bring their spirits together. They're present in their everyday life. Their deceased loved ones are there, and they make these altars in their homes that kind of acknowledge their deceased relatives, and then they have a celebration to celebrate the fact that they're coming together with them. So very, very beautiful.
Yes.
I don't know if there were any more, but that gives you like a little bit of an idea of some of these tradition bearers and the strength that they can have in passing on traditions and positive child rearing practices.
Okay. Why do you consider the share part of the program as the heart of the CREATE project?
Well, like I said, it is a way for the tradition bearers to be connecting with the families and for families to connect together. This is something that's very close, one-on-one, and very intimate. So we're going to try to, and we are doing this already, create opportunities for the tradition bearers to share not only with their own families, but with the larger community. And when they're doing this, not only are they sharing the traditions, but they're sharing ways of being with individuals. A lot of people who have come from, all of us have come from some kind of stress or trauma in our lives. And some people never ever experienced what it feels like to be nurtured, to be parented in a very positive way. So the tradition bearers already have a lot of intuition in this area. They have some education now in this area, and they are going to actually kind of reparent the parents. This is not something you can learn from a book. You need to experience what it feels like to be in a relationship with somebody who cares about you, who wants to pass something on. When they share with the parents, then the parents are empowered to share with the children. So the children are present, but it's really the parents who are going to be passing not just the tradition, but the way that the tradition is done with love, with caring. There's actually a few dimensions that we incorporate into this whole process that are borrowed from something called theraplay. And theraplay is a kind of an intervention that is used by therapists who are counseling parents and families who they have only supervised visitation. The conditions were so stressful or not so good that they can only see their children under these supervised conditions. So the idea is to share what it feels like to nurture someone, to actually be engaged and to actually be present and have that connection with your child or another person, to have something that's like a gentle challenge. You don't want something to be so challenging that it's too stressful, and you don't want something to be just boring. There's no connection. And gentle structure, you don't want things to be so rigid that everybody's going to be tense. But you need some structure. You need some structure to make things go on, and the traditions do that. The traditions oftentimes create a structure that makes you know that life is going to go on, that there's a continuity.
What kinds of programs do you offer?
Oh, well, as I was saying, I'm just going to pass over here. Right now, we're doing this music program with Bennett Brass, these three internationally kind of known musicians who actually shared how to create music together. So anybody could come, kids, adults, anyone, grandparents, and they would hand out the instruments and then show everybody how they could create music together. Very beautiful. And then they would also do a little performance. So they're sharing their tradition, and they're sharing how to create this tradition in the community and the family. We also have a sewing program going on now. This is down in Dunkirk, and we have, this is Debbie Kaczynski, and she is sharing creative sewing practices with kids and adults. And so this mom learned how to do some sewing, and then she shared how to do the sewing with her daughter right in the midst of this workshop. But it's not just the sewing, it's in the midst of this very positive relationship. And so it's very, very rich, very beautiful. Here's a little newspaper article that was run in the Observer, and there's some photos that we have of some of the different people who are participating. So, and we're actually going to be starting Tai Chi class very soon
Oh,
also.
good.
So there's a few of these different kinds of things that are going on, and we hope to grow. It's really going to be, the more we have a lot of tradition bearers who are listed on our website, which I can tell you about in a minute. And we also have different art projects that a lot of artists would like to do, and we have a number of community partners.
Okay. You said the third part was called Reach.
Oh, yes, reach is the idea that this is something that we need to reach out to everyone. This is not something that we want just people dealing with education or people dealing with child abuse issues. Every single person, whatever their age, whatever their circumstance, is affected by this issue. And we want everyone to say, I embrace this as part of what I'm going to do. I'm going to learn what I can about it. I'm going to spread the word that we all need to be part of this solution and understand what the issue is about and what we can do to make more positive conditions.
Mm-hmm. And what do you hope people will do?
Well, I hope that we will have people talk about it to each other and learn everything that they can about these issues, and especially to let us know that they want to be part of this, not just a program, but kind of a movement. We want to know, and so they can add their name to our website so we can be in communication and we can kind of figure out how we can do this together. Another thing I would just love is if people would be, if they're so inclined, to make a donation to the CREATE project through the Northern Chautauqua Community Foundation.
Oh, okay.
They're our fiscal sponsor.
Okay.
They're a 501c3.
Okay.
So if you are, if you would like to help support this effort and this initiative, and become part of it on any level, we'll be most grateful. We have a little brochure. I don't know if you want me to share it.
There's a brochure right here.
There's the CREATE project brochure, and we've got that, and we have another brochure. We have some other different printed materials that we can share for anybody who is making a donation or anybody at all.
Oh, sure.
The Boys and Girls Club also of Northern Chautauqua County is our lead community partner. And something I didn't mention for other things that we're doing in the community. Mm-hmm. We also have, this last summer we had a summer art camp where we had different tradition bearers sharing with kids through the Dunkirk schools, and also an after-school program that was also funded by the Dunkirk schools. So that was really fantastic. The city of Dunkirk has also been kind of a leader with this, and they actually, on behalf of the CREATE project, just applied for a major grant.
Oh.
So it would be very exciting if we got that.
Oh, yeah. Well, good luck to you on that. Now we are about down to like 9.5 minutes.
Okay.
You have a book here called Creative Interventions with Traumatized Children.
Oh, yes. This is a book by Kathy Malchiotti, and she is a kind of a leader in using the arts in working with people who have been traumatized, and particularly children. And she is very well versed in what happens to children when they're traumatized and how to help them through this. One of the things that happens with kids is sometimes they have what is known as an attachment disorder. So they have a hard time, they haven't bonded well with their caretaker, and for that reason they have a lot of issues and a lot of problems because they don't have an investment in another person. So and she has a lot of different kinds of ideas and concepts for working with kids and using the arts to help them through trauma. So that's a little bit about
Okay.
Kathy.
One thing I wanted to mention is the situation that's going on now with immigrant children being taken away from separated from their parents when they come into the country, and if you ask me, I think that qualifies as both abuse and neglect.
Absolutely. And it really reflects, very sadly, a very deep lack of understanding of children and what their needs are. Children, as I was mentioning before, can be very, very gravely damaged, brain damage, by having trauma, and to be separated from your primary caretaker, from your parent, can actually change the structure of your brain. What happens with trauma is that you have your prefrontal cortex of your brain, the thinking, decision-making part of your brain, and then you have the amygdala, which is kind of the limbic system, the emotional part of your brain. When a person experiences too much stress, their pituitary gland sends out stress hormones, and it burns up the interconnections between their prefrontal cortex and the emotional part of their brain. So they are only dealing with the emotional part of their brain. So those children who may be able to function very well up to this point, and because they have a nurturing relationship, they may be so traumatized that they may be losing those interconnections, and it may take years to resolve this problem. It's very, very serious, and I think that it's too bad that the powers that be don't really recognize that this is not something that you play around with.
I know I read a book, I think a year or so ago, on people in certain parts of the world that live to be unusually old and so forth, and apparently the children are all very well adjusted, and it seems to me the only thing, they don't actually punish their children if they misbehave. They actually, all they do, the only punishment really is they just withhold praise. And it seems that they're continuously praising the children as long as they're behaving really well. And I thought that was very unusual. It's completely different from
right, because there's so many different beliefs about what's the right way to raise kids, and there's some people who believe, as I mentioned in my earlier example, humiliation is how you get kids in line. But research does not bear that out. You need a very nurturing, a very, very special, and it seems very natural kind of environment for a child to grow and to thrive. So yes, that makes perfect sense. This whole idea that children need punishment is really a myth that our society and many societies perpetuate. They need love, they need nurturing, engagement, gentle structure, gentle challenge. So punishment is something that actually could really cause those stress hormones to come out, and that child will be misbehaving more and more because they don't know how to regulate their own emotions. They don't have the capacity to make good decisions. So really it's guaranteeing problems when you are overstressing a child, leaving a child to cry, leaving a child to to be isolated. These are not effective and very, very damaging and very dangerous practices.
Well, we've got about less than 4 minutes left, so I know you brought a whole bunch of things with you to talk about. So what I would do if I were you is pick out the ones that we still need to cover that are the most important from your opinion.
Okay. I'll share a little bit about this project that I did because I think that this is relevant. This is a series of artworks that I had done, that are triptychs. They are in 3 pieces. I'm going to just move this for a second here. And these triptychs show on the outside our idealized idea about the way children were raised throughout history. And, you know, we have an idealized idea. We think, oh, those children in Egypt in ancient times, they were, you know, all this gold or whatever. And, you know, and there is some evidence of that. There's evidence of in different cultures, very positive practices happening. But these triptychs have kind of a sad story because the reality does not match up with our idealized image. For instance, like from the 4th to the 13th century, the main mode of child rearing was abandonment. Kids would be abandoned on the sides of mountains. They would be abandoned through being left with a wet nurse who was not necessarily a nurturing person invested in the child. They'd be abandoned emotionally, perhaps. They would be made to be pages or servants. So there's different kinds of abandonment that children have gone through. And the reason I'm just kind of pointing out this is that we have this fantasy that maybe it was better in the good old days, you know, for one reason or the other. But for my research and the research of many people, children have, it looks like on the surface that, oh, they must have had it pretty nice. There's this like little fairy tale idea. But the truth is, we have, and this final one is kind of a depiction of, it's my own interpretation of the UNICEF logo, and we think, oh, children around the world are happy together. And to tell you the truth, this is the best time for children that we've ever had in history.
Mm-hmm. But in spite of what we've been hearing about on the news.
Right. But the truth is we have inherited this legacy of not caring for children the way they need to be cared for. And it is horrendous. And we need to face that legacy and really embrace it and say, we're going to do better. We're going to do better for our children and for ourselves. It's going to mean everything. So that's one. Do we have time left for one more, or are we out?
18 seconds. Yeah, we can run over a minute or two if you want to.
All right. I'll share this just because I think this is kind of a fascinating little thing. There's this idea here that we have, I don't know which way I should face it. Oh, okay. We can. So the idea is that there's a couple things that happen with people who abuse or neglect. One is projection, that they project onto their child their unwanted parts of themselves. That's one idea.
Oh.
And I have an art piece for that, and I just wanted to mention that because I think it's a very important thing. Another thing that happens is parents, when they're kids, they may not have had their needs met. So when they grow up and become parents, this is a parent, they are expecting the child to meet those needs that they never had met as a child. And this is not intentional. This just kind of happens. And the child, of course, always fails. The child can't fulfill an adult's need for love, for attention, for nurture, whatever. And so when the child fails, because that's something the parent is supposed to be giving to the child, mm-hmm. and then it's a reciprocal thing happening. The child can't do this. So when the child can't achieve this, parents become frustrated and they lash out. Why doesn't this child behave and love me the way you're not loving me? So it's a complex little psychological thing that happens, but those are two patterns that happen in families, and it's kind of a dynamic that happens with adults who abuse kids. And also the idea of objectifying children, that kids, it hurts you more than it hurts me. Mm-hmm. No, it really hurts a child much more than an adult.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again for coming on today.
Oh, thank you.
We've come to the end of another episode of Fresh Perspectives, and I'll see the rest of you in a couple of weeks.